want to start?
Maybe not. Maybe not. Nah, it's not.
You're batshit crazy.
Hello. Welcome to Books and Brunch. I'm Noelle.
I'm Amber.
And today we're talking about Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin.
Yes. And if you have not listened or watched before, we will not give any spoilers until we tell you we're going to give spoilers, so that if you're deciding that, you may or may not want to check out the book, we kind of at the beginning of all of ours give you some information about the author and about the book, and then you can say, hey, that sounds good or not. And then about midway through, we'll actually get into talking where we have some spoilers.
In the past, our episodes have been a little rambly. We have kind of tangents.
Hey now.
However, today we'll try to be, what's the word I'm looking for?
Concise?
Yeah, concise, and also like more literary.
Noelle wants to sound smarter than we normally do.
Talk about our brunch recipe, talk about a synopsis of the book, some background on if there's a story to how this book came to be, a little bit about the author, and then kind of break it down and talk about styles, tropes, themes, symbolism, things like that.
Okay, now she tells me.
Yeah. Because I made notes.
I have lots of notes too, because this book was incredible and it was complicated.
Yes.
Not just like a point A to point B type of book, and so it requires some notes.
How would you summarize the book if you had to give someone a synopsis?
Okay, so I actually watched an interview with Gabrielle Zevin, and she said that when she's asked to synopsize the book, this is what she says. She said that at first she starts to panic because the book is so complicated, so she'll just say it's about love, art, video games, and time. She said then that seemed kind of vague, so she started adding it's about two kids who meet, spend the next 30 years making and playing games, and also what if the person who is your most important person in life wasn't the person you would suspect, like a spouse or a kid. You suspect them to be the most important, but what if instead it was like a colleague or a friend? And then the book also reflects her belief that a great love story can be a great friendship story. And then I believe in the back of the book she also says it's about work. And so I would say like I said, it's a complicated, and so you're following these two characters from the time they're like 12-ish all the way into their 30s, late 30s. Honestly, if I hadn't, I think this was one of your picks, right? Because we take turns picking books. I wouldn't have picked this one if I had just read it's about video games, like gaming and making games, and kind of a character driven, because I don't game, but it was so fascinating. But it is about them making games, but then how work and its relationships with friends, with lovers, with parents. It's about loss. It's about just kind of life, I guess, but based around these two and who build a company making video games.
I'm glad she threw in sort of on that tail end of her description that it's about work, because these are some really hardworking people in non-traditional work settings, right? This idea of when you're a creative person, and I think writers are kind of in there, and maybe she pulled from being a writer when she was writing their kind of characters' worth ethics. When you're working on a project, it's kind of all you're thinking about, and so your work days are kind of all the time, all day, every day, whether you're thinking about it, researching something that seems like only a little bit related, but it really is helping you come up with ideas. So yeah,
and I think it's so heavy with the themes that it have, because she said that the book's not about one thing. She said that her novels are a reflection of where she is in her life, that they're the existential questions and dilemmas that she's facing at the time, and then she creates a novel around that. And so that's why there's so much to this. And then she actually had a list of questions that she kind of poses as things to think about as you're reading the book. And so I can give you those whenever you're ready for those too.
I felt really close to this book. And I know it's like one of those things where every time you read a book, you kind of like see yourself in one of the characters. And I would say I haven't felt really close to a character like Sadie in a really long time. Maybe since, I don't know, Franny and Zoe by J.D. Salinger or something. But like I felt so much of Sadie in a lot of her negative qualities. I felt so as I was reading it, it was kind of like almost making me look at myself and being like, oh man, I do that. That's not good. That is not good for friendships. That's not good for, And then Sam character reminds me of like my childhood best friend Tom, who lives in LA, and we've never had a romantic relationship, but he's arguably, other than my husband, the most important man in my life. So I really felt, I don't know, I felt connected. Remember, we're not doing tangents.
When she was talking about kind of what inspired it, like I said, she talks about what's happening in her own life, but she said this particular one, it was very similar to Sadie, because she said her 9th novel didn't do as well as her 8th novel. And so she said it's like how Sadie, once you have big success, you kind of expect your career to be successful and to keep going. Right. And then all of a sudden you have this setback. And so she said that when that happened, she just wanted to retreat into reading and playing games from her youth. And so she was trying to track down this game called Gold Rush that she always played as a kid. And she discovered that the company who put it out was a husband and wife. And so she started thinking about that generation that's like between millennial and what's the Gen Y
X
or whatever. Yeah, that kind of in between there, and how they grew up with video games and they were kind of the first generation who got to experience storytelling through video games. And she decided to write a story about people who were in that generation and made games. And so that's how this particular idea, I guess, came about.
Yeah. Well, and every video game reference was like so nostalgic for me. I was like,
yeah,
like even the whole, like, I remember my parents used to be part of this church group, and they would meet at this pizza shop like every, I don't know, one day a week or something for Bible study. And it was like me and 3 of the other kids. We just played Donkey Kong in the back. It was like Donkey Kong and like
no wonder you
Fighter.
Related to Sadie.
Yeah, I was like, I know, this is my childhood.
Like, I've been there, I'm her. But she said that her parents both worked at IBM.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, so she kind of grew up in that environment. And in the book, they make the video game called Emily Blaster. They made it in real life, so
really?
You can play it.
That's
yeah,
cool.
So you just go to emilyblaster.com and you can play it.
Oh,
and,
that's really cool.
Yeah, and she sold the movie rights. And this book was the first book in Jimmy Fallon's book club.
Who would you cast as the 3 main characters, Sadie, Sam, and Marks?
Oh, I would have to really think about that. I never picture the characters as like people I've seen before.
Really?
Once they sell movie rights and I am like, okay, they're going to be casting, then I'll think about it. But like as I'm reading, I don't ever picture like an exact person.
Interesting.
Something wrong with me?
No, but I think so. I definitely pictured Kid Sam as. Did you ever see Moonrise Kingdom? It's a Wes Anderson film.
We should start keeping a tally of every book and movie reference you make. And I'm like, no idea. Never read it, never seen it.
One of my favorite quotes from the book, it reminded me when you were talking about Gabrielle Zevin talking about the kind of the success of her 8th book, her frustration with the 9th book. And it's when Sadie and Marks are visiting Japan and they're walking through the Shinto arches.
Oh, the gates?
Yeah. She says this. It occurred to Sadie, she had thought after Ichigo, their first successful game, that she would never fail again. She had thought she arrived, but life is always arriving. There was always another gate to pass through. Of course, until there wasn't. Like, the final gate. But that's one thing I loved about Sadie. Sadie compares everything that's happening in her life to some kind of game. Like, she falls back on game references for surviving reality.
How old is the author? She does not look very old.
I think she's younger than us.
the like life wisdom that's in this book, it was just amazing. I mean, for anybody, but especially somebody who seems as young as she seems. And there's just so many references, like you said, through gaming, and I'm not a gamer, but that address to life, you know, when they talk about like death, that people who game, it's hard for them to accept because in a game you just start over and there's no final death. And so just different things like that. I would recommend, even if you don't play video games or anything, it's a very, very good book. My daughter actually started reading it today, and she's like already 60 pages and like she just barely started.
I like couldn't really sleep. I just wanted to read it. There's this saying that is in video games, if you are not encountering monsters, aka obstacles, then you're probably going the wrong way. So you want to change your direction, because obstacles, monsters, resistance, adversity is a sign that you're on the correct path for your quest.
See, and like you stayed up reading it. I took forever to read it because that's what I do when I really like a book. I don't want to finish it. And
really?
Just like, I'll just read like a little bit throughout the day. You know, so it's like you're always kind of staying with it. Oh. The questions, because if you're listening or watching right now, you possibly have not read it yet. So these are some of the questions from the author they're kind of life questions, but questions she wanted the book to bring up and questions that maybe the book can answer. The first one was, what makes us keep trying? Like whatever it is, you know, like what makes you keep trying? What makes a difficult friendship or relationship worth the work it takes to stay connected?
That's a good
Why
question.
do we make art for a world that is often indifferent? What is the eternally hopeful or insane part of us that struggles on expecting a different result? And then she said one of the answers, maybe it's the gamer.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, those were all, this book really does it. It makes you ask a lot of questions and think about things, and just great like life advice, which made me kind of mad because she's so young.
Well,
like,
especially,
how are you doing this?
Especially like the way that Sam's grandparents would give advice. There was just such this sense of sage wisdom.
Yes. And it's
recipe before we forget.
Yes.
So the recipe of today for brunch, if you want an inspired meal that reminds you of this book, if you're like me and you get really into your character and you start like trying to dress the way you think your character would or eat the food that your character eats, because I do that because I'm mentally ill. Sadie's favorite pizza when she was a child and still lived on the West Coast by Sam, and this was like during their childhood phase of their friendship. Sam's grandparents, who owned a pizza shop, they would always make the Sadie special, and it was what she always got, and it was pepperoni and mushrooms on a pizza. So I kind of put together a little homemade crust. I was kind of imagining it like you could do like a little personal pizza, but if you wanted to like double the recipe and make one to include others.
But for some people, a larger one is a personal pizza.
That's true. No, you're right. You're right. So
I can tell you about the title.
Tell me about the title. Yeah.
Okay.
The Shakespeare quote.
Yes, which I did not know. And I was like, oh, what an interesting title. So Tomorrow is from Macbeth, Act 5, the soliloquy from Act 5. And Gabrielle Zevin said it's one of the bleakest speeches in Shakespeare. And one of the characters, the character of Marx, he was an actor in college. And he found the speech to be hopeful, that we start every day like new and fresh, and so everybody else saw this speech to be completely bleak. It gave him hope, and that's where the phrase comes from, is from Macbeth.
Yep. And just fun fact, all Shakespeare plays have 5 acts, so Act 5 is always the final act. It's one of those things.
I am not a fan of Shakespeare. I really loved the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, yeah.
And Clara Danes. But
Yes.
other than that, my only experience with Shakespeare was reading it in high school and it making no sense. And that was it.
I was really lucky. I had a great Shakespeare teacher in high school. His name was Mark Pfister, and I think he was the best. Made me, like, we read mostly like the comedies, the kind of easier ones, but he took us to see a lot of like live local theater shows. So when I was in college and became an English major, I ended up taking this like advanced, like, probably I was too young to be in the, like, I probably should have taken more leading up to this.
Prereqs.
I was so stoked. I took this Shakespeare class, and we were reading we would read a play. The next day, have to write a paper on it, or no, take a quiz on it, and it would be, this is how her quizzes were. She took a quote, no context, just a quote. You had to say what scene, what act it was, who said it, and the gist of that part.
Psychopath.
But we read one play every week. So we'd like read the play on Monday, take the test on Tuesday, and then we'd have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday to write a paper on it. And then next Monday, the very next play.
I recognize the artwork on the cover
Yeah.
from the Japanese
The
art.
wave.
I did not know that the wave was actually carved into a wood block to do stamping.
I did not know
initially.
that either. There's
trying to see-
references in there to Donkey Kong, to
Yeah, because it's late 80s, early 90s is kind of when it starts, and then it
Yeah.
goes all the way into like the teen 2000s, I guess.
yeah. Yep. And so their childhood is filled with like a lot of like ours. If you're in your 30s right now, you played Oregon Trail, and not the new one that has graphics, the one that's just the black screen with the neon green letters that says like, "You have come to a river. Do you want to cross?" Let's talk about themes.
Okay.
Because I started making a list of the most important themes and trying to like tier them based on like the most important. Then what I found was that they all had like a shadow theme.
There's like an umbrella theme that all these things fall underneath.
Yeah, or that one theme brings out its opposite type theme. Let me explain.
Yeah.
Okay. So a big theme is disability and illness, physical disability and mental illness
Okay.
as a theme that characters in the movie experience.
In the book.
And then it made me realize that it's connected to secrecy and pride, or like hiding your disabilities, hiding your mental illness, hiding your struggles, and being prideful, like to overcompensate for.
Okay.
And I had never thought about that until I was making the list, because I had put disability and illness together, and then I had put trauma and compound trauma. And compound trauma is just when you've had a very serious childhood trauma, like one of the characters in the story, and then in your adulthood, you have another very serious trauma. And even though they're not linked, they create a compound trauma, which makes it even harder. It brings back the trauma you never dealt with as a childhood, and now you're an adult with the second trauma, and so it's that much bigger. It becomes like it's something way bigger than just that. They're not isolated incidents, and trauma doesn't work that way. Both of our characters are very secret, and they isolate themselves in
They
their
have
own
walls out.
Yeah, and how those things are absolutely related to trauma. They're rooted in trauma, right?
And just, I think also that kind of base human way where we want people to see us a certain way, and we want to be perceived a certain way, and anything about us or our life or experiences that doesn't coincide with that, then we keep that to ourselves and we hide it. Yeah.
Well, Sadie makes an interesting observation when we're talking about that, about how she's talking about the difference in generations and how they both keep their childhood traumas and their issues and their struggles to themselves to a fault. Like, to the point where it's like, there were times when Sadie really should have reached out for help and told someone that she was struggling. There are times where Sam should have asked for help, because when he didn't, he got more injured.
Got worse. Yeah.
But then there's also so Sadie becomes a professor in the future. That's not much of a spoiler. And she has these Gen Z students, right? And she says their age group, they are really okay with talking about their trauma, and they almost identify with their trauma. And Sam's like, that's kind of weird. And Sadie's like, yeah, because how do you ever heal from something or get past something that you have kind of merged your identity with or rooted your identity in? And one of them, maybe Sam says, well, maybe there's like a secret there. Like, maybe that's actually not a bad thing. Maybe it kind of normalizes your trauma or whatever.
I think there's a middle ground. Whenever it's like they focus on it and they want everyone to know because they want sympathy and they want attention, and they rely on that to be, kind of how they're identified. I think that's very unhealthy, but also just completely like acting
burying
like it happened and hiding it is also very unhealthy.
Right. One thing his grandparents there's like a flashback towards the end where he's asking his grandparents, how did you get through this trauma that I still have not healed from? And they are essentially like, we haven't. You just take it one day at a time. Like, it doesn't ever go away. You're never magically better. You're never magically like cured.
Yeah, like, you just get up, you go to work, you come home, you just keep going through the motions.
Yeah, and it's bleak, but it's also true, because
I think one of the other themes was Sadie, she's a game maker, she's a programmer, and even now, I don't think, which I haven't looked at any statistics, but I don't think that women are normally, the majority. But back then, especially, like in her class, it was like her and one other female, and then it was all guys.
Right.
And so that's a theme, kind of her, breaking through and doing that, and throughout, trying to, a lot of people think Sam made the games and he gets the credit, and she gets upset by that because she's actually the engine builder and programmer and everything. And this is kind of long, but I want to read it because I thought it was so interesting. This guy just asked her, how do you get into making video games anyway? And it says, Sadie hated answering this question, especially after a person had told her that he hadn't heard of Ichigo. That's the game that they made. And so this is like how she would answer the question. She's like, well, I learned to program computers in middle school. I got an 800 on my math SAT, and then I went to MIT, which, by the way, is highly competitive even for a lowly female like myself, and studied computer science. At MIT, I learned 4 or 5 more programming languages and studied psychology with an emphasis on ludic techniques and persuasive designs, and English, including narrative structures, the classics, and the history of interactive storytelling. Got myself a great mentor, regrettably made him my boyfriend. Suffice it to say, I was young, and then I dropped out of school for a time to make a game because my best friend and me wanted me to. That game became the game you never heard of, but yeah, it sold around 2.5 million copies just in the US. So instead, she said, I like to play games a lot, so I thought I'd see if I could make them. And I don't know if that necessarily has to do with her being a female, but just, I think we do that a lot in life. Like when people say, oh, how are you? Good. You just give the easy answer and not, giving yourself credit for what you've done. I mean, that's insane. And just being like, yeah, no, I just like to make games, so I made them.
sometimes you feel like you want to, feel like you need to give someone your credentials, you know? I find myself in that situation. If I feel like someone's talking down to me, I want to be like, well, just so you know, I've done this and this and this, and this and this and this. And so, yeah, I do know what I'm talking about. But instead, I might just be like, okay, I understand that you're hesitant, but I assure you I will do a good job.
In our culture, the more socially acceptable thing is to just kind of stay like
For women,
even.
for sure.
Yeah, just stay even, say the nice, polite thing. Because I have problems with not doing that just because of what my job was for so long. I'm just like, "Wah!" And then I just see their response and I'm like, oh, too far? Too much?
I applied for this job one time. This was when I was in college to go half and half with like college and school. And I had been a pharmacy tech, and then I moved to a different state. I wasn't going to do pharmacy tech again. I just kind of wanted something that was like a day job and then do like evening classes and weekend classes. So I applied to this job assembling, just part assembly, like one stage on the assembly line, pretty cut and dry. And when I went to apply there, they were like, we don't have any women who work here. And I was like, oh, that's okay, whatever. But I was an aircraft mechanic, so I am qualified. And the lady was like, we actually don't hire women though, because we have
That's
married.
illegal.
Remember going home and being like, I'm gonna sue the shit out of this company. And my
Yeah,
husband
that's
was like,
so illegal.
yeah. This was in like 2012.
Oh my gosh.
My husband was like, I support you if you want to do that. We do not have the money for a lawyer. And he's like, but also I know your brain and how like being in a state of being mad like just like breaks your mental wellness down further than it already is. Is that something you want to put your energy into? And I was like, you're right. No, I don't want to put my energy into that.
No, that's so illegal.
Yeah.
That's crazy. And I mean, it's illegal to do it, but to actually tell the applicant, this is why we won't hire you. I mean, most of the time when a company does that, they just find another reason why they're not going to hire them. They don't just straight up tell them,
right,
because you're female, we don't hire women.
I don't claim to be some sort of like militant feminist, but I have had some bizarre work experiences, especially in the military, like that are just so fucked up that when I think about it, I'm like, I hope that doesn't happen to a lot of other people, but I know that it must. But I have to just like hope in my heart every morning that it like gets better. But I remember
have some friends who are in the military and some females, and the stories that they would tell. And so my daughter, this is her senior year, and so every time she would get a letter in the mail from like the Marines, I would just tear it up and throw it away. I wouldn't even give it to her because I'm like, the stories my friends tell me that still are going on for women, it is not okay.
I'm thankful for the opportunities my military service gave me and the travel, like the life experiences I had. But it was definitely a much harder path than I thought it was going to be. And like the military portion was fine, but I had human interactions and work experiences that an 18, 19, 20-year-old girl is not ready for. And it kind of like rocked my world for a while. When I got out of the military, I was a very angry person. I was very like, hated everybody. I hated the world. I hated men. I hated feeling like people looked down on me. I had a lot of issues coming out of that, and I had to relearn how to be a human. I had to learn a kind of resilience that didn't come from a place of aggression, but resilience that came from a place of like inner peace. You know, that's the other thing about the book is you can fight all these battles, right? But like life is hard enough. Don't go searching for battles to fight. They'll present themselves. There will be battles.
This was whenever Sam was talking to his grandpa. And this was just like the really simple life advice that we were saying that like came from the grandparents.
I loved his grandparents.
Yeah. So they were kind of just talking about the grandparents had started a pizza place when they moved to, they call it K-Town. It's all where the Koreans lived in, was it Los Angeles?
Yeah, Los Angeles.
And they initially, it wasn't pizza, but they said that like there wasn't a pizza place there in K-Town, and he was like, you know, they didn't know anything about pizza, and so they set out to learn about pizza because they didn't have any choice. They had kids, bills to pay and stuff. And the grandpa says, your cousin Albert told me that in business they call this a pivot, but life is filled with them too. The most successful people are also the most able to change their mindset. Just that simple idea of you have a mindset and idea about something, and pivoting that it seems like such a simple, you know, concept and solution, but it is so against like my nature. Like, but no, that's like, and I don't even realize I'm doing it. It's like I just always keep going back to like, but no, that's how that's what I do. So I keep doing it. Like, I just recently made changes at work.
I was gonna say, you just made a huge pivot.
Yeah, and it's like mentally before I did it, like thinking about it, it was just seemed so wrong, but like in my gut it seemed so right, and I'm just like so much like happier now, even though like, but it was, I loved that part of my job, but that part of my job had changed, and so I didn't love it anymore, but it was still, I was still doing the same thing, and so to just step back and leave it, just the idea of that in my head was just like, like, what are you doing? But I was like, I believe in trusting your gut. And now it's like, it's only been like, what, 2 weeks or something? But yeah, no regrets at all. That whole idea of pivoting, it's just, because normally you're going to be stepping out of your comfort zone and you're going to be leaving behind safety or something. You're leaving something behind because you're pivoting away from something to pivot, you know, in another direction. Do you want to get into talking where there's spoilers?
Yes, because I want to talk about how the book is organized into sections. And then
there was one
chapters.
section I really liked. Real quick, I want to go back to when you were talking about like the themes, and you were talking about disability and secrecy and all of that. I did a writing workshop yesterday, and it was about writing and doing like the grand gesture. And so she said the things that you need for the grand gesture. And after I did the writing workshop, I realized what the grand gesture was in this book. Like, what would you say the grand gesture that Sam does in this book is?
Creating that world for Sadie and putting himself in it and putting Marks in it.
No. So with a grand gesture, the character who's performing the gesture, you have to know what their fear is, right? So they have some sort of fear, and so like Sam's fear was being hurt by people, you know, not fitting in and getting hurt, having people leave him. Like, so he'd put up these walls, he would hide things, like he had so much loss in his life, and being rejected, like I guess rejection basically too. And then you have to know like what that character's need is, and then you have to know the character they're giving the grand gesture to, what that person's love language is, and so what's important to them. And then Sam had to overcome his fear to give Sadie to speak to her in her own love language, but he has to make himself vulnerable for it to be a grand gesture. When he made the video game, he wasn't making himself vulnerable. That's something he's like comfortable with.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and he makes games. He does that. That was, you know, she felt like that was selfish. It was when he said "I love you" to her.
Yes, because he always said terribly. She would say "I love you, Sam," and he would say terribly.
Yes, and so I was like, that was a very simple, like it's normally this big thing, but he got over that fear and he put it out there. And she had even commented, you know, like he couldn't say it, like she was aware and stuff. But it was like such a small little thing, but such like a big moment. Like that he did that. But I started, so like the examples she gave this speaker was in Pretty Woman, because the main guy is afraid of heights, and then he's also afraid of like,
I've never seen Pretty Woman.
Oh really? He's afraid of heights, and he's also afraid of like not being seen as successful. And at the end, he, spoiler, he climbs up this fire escape to her, and I mean, he's like petrified of heights. Like there's a scene that shows that earlier, and so he does that at her apartment to like show her, like to get over that, because her love language was she wanted a knight in shining armor. She wanted someone to rescue her, and so he was like, okay, I need to be that for her. Like he had money, he could buy her things, but that didn't affect him. It didn't. He didn't have to get over anything to do that. So it's like
those were gestures. They weren't a grand gesture.
Yeah, and so I'm like, when you put that into real life, also, like so many things in this book, and you like, okay, if I want to do something for someone, it has to be me getting over whatever my fear is to do something important for them that they need, not that I need.
Yeah.
And so I think with like the Pioneer game, Sam did it for her, but he also did it because it was what he needed. Because he needed to talk to her.
You're right. That's so right. You're amazing.
So that was the writer's workshop. It was $10. It was so worth it too. I was like, that was like, it's such a simple concept. And, it's one of those things that it's like, once I see it, now in everything I read,
you're like, that's the grand gesture. I'm definitely made thinking about that.
Yeah. So if you're a writer, she said that's the first thing you need to know about your main characters are, what is their fear? What are they afraid of? Because that's going to shape so much of their personality and what they do and their goals and everything. And I never thought about it from that standpoint. But if they're like a well-developed character, like you and the reader like should be able to say what their fear is.
Right.
And there was a lot of that in this book.
Yeah, there was. Yes, there was. In part 7, the first time we see like a new style of narration, and it is, where is it? It's interesting for 2 reasons. Because I don't think that when people do flashy or weird narration changes, I think there needs to always be a reason. I had a creative writing teacher one time tell me, like, you only want to do things like that when it's necessary, when it serves the story. If it doesn't serve the story, it's going to seem pretentious, or it's going to seem like you're just trying to be flashy or try to do something weird. But you want it to serve the story. So I asked myself when I got to chapter 7 or section 7, which, huge spoiler, Marx is killed.
Yeah.
Awful. Section 7 is written in second person, and it's what he's experiencing in death.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Yeah.
One reason why
is the rest of it in third person?
Yeah, everything.
I didn't even notice. Yeah, it was. Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So chapter 7 is, you are flying below a checkerboard of country life. A pair of Jersey cows graze in a lavender field. Blah 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 blah.
I took it as he was kind of like in this dream state because he's in that coma, and the print his mother had showed them that was on that footstool, that was it was like birds and strawberries and stuff.
Oh, and that's so what it was.
Yeah, it's like his subconscious, and he's in a dream, and then it's like all these different little parts of his life are there.
And then he realizes things like this. You are dying. You are dying. He's remembering who he is. He's the child of Ryu in Aran Lee Wantabi. You were born in New Jersey. You have 2 passports. They called you, or the nameplate on your desk reads Mark Swantabi, tamer of horses. You've had many lives. He's remembering what he was like in high school, what he was like after high school. He was remembering like times in his life that were meaningful, and then he's remembering the moments leading up to him being shot. But so it's all in second person. It's very dreamy,
hazy, but not confusing.
Here's why I think it serves the narrative and wasn't just to be quirky. Sam called Marks an NPC, and in gaming terms that means a non-player character. A non-player character. I'm like, and so NPCs don't have any wants or desires. They're not self-aware. They have these like actions and these lines that they have that are pre-programmed in. And so an NPC would never have a second person narration. They would never be aware of what they were doing, of what they were experiencing, of their memories. And so I think this kind of like in this final moment of Mark's coming to terms with his life ending and his role in there is he's realizing his role in all of their successes and in his life and in the life of those that he loves. But it's also, we're seeing that he's absolutely not an NPC. He is this main character of his story. These accomplishments are his. This is how he held the group together. This is what made these games happen. We're in the perspective of Mark's. We're experiencing his experiences like the protagonist of a game.
When you were saying like you identified with Sadie, I think like I probably identified with Mark's.
Oh, I love that. Are we in love?
Oh, I didn't even put that together.
Are we soulmates, but we won't find it out for years? There's so much to talk about with this book, but I do want to... I think we should stay on theme. I think we've talked about great stuff. Let us know what you thought about it, your favorite parts, favorite passages. I wish people sent me their favorite passages from books. Like, that is my love language. When you write it on our Instagram, seriously.
For my daughter's graduation party, we just printed out, it's like a big foam board, and we put our senior pictures on it, and we printed it, and it was like $20-something. And I was like, what the heck? Like, that's crazy. So I told her I'm going to take pictures of pages of books, like passages I like, and get them printed like that.
Anything else that you wanted to talk about before we wrap up?
The friendship aspect, like I really appreciated that. And then, her and Sam, at one point she was like, why shouldn't I just be with Sam kind of thing. But they were saying, their partnership, like to Sam, he's like, the partnership that we have, he's like, is so much more important than like a girlfriend type of partnership. And she was almost like, this is the next logical step. We're always together. We're friends. We get along. Right. And it's like, but if you're not attracted to him that way, like you shouldn't. And I think a lot of people make that mistake. Like someone can be a friend and that can be just as important of a relationship. And you don't have to, you know what I'm saying? 'Cause that's not necessarily the right. I did feel sorry for him because he was always kind of in love with her.
So Sam, what I loved about this book that I never realized until just fucking now, Sam never talked about Sadie sexually. Like his love for her never had anything to do with beauty. It was her brain. Yeah. He loved her brain.
He loved making the
He never
games
talked
with her
about
and
her body.
About it.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
He never talked about her body. He never talked about, like, you'll see in books, sometimes it'll be like when someone is, like, when he saw her when she was, like, going through that serious depression, she was not showering. She was not wearing makeup. She was not taking care of herself. She wasn't eating. She was just staying in bed and sleeping. And I imagine she looked like absolute dog shit. And Sam never said, like, she looked terrible. He was like, my friend is hurting. But you also find out that, like, Sam has he has issues with intimacy because of his injury. And also because...
but you know what?
He's like neurodivergent in a lot of ways that make him brilliant, but also make it hard for him to have relationships.
We get description of Sam a lot, and it's not necessarily like attractive description. You know, they talk about the big coat, they talk about his hair, they talk about his limp, they talk a lot about like his physical description. And it was to the point with Sadie, like I had to go back because I was like, what does she look like? I didn't even know what she looked like. And I wonder if the author did that on purpose to not focus on the female's appearance, but on her like abilities. Yeah, well, Sadie's Jewish because that's why she keeps going back to see him, because she's getting the community service
For her
her bat mitzvah.
Yes.
And then
Sam's half Korean, and Mark's is half Japanese. And so some of the inspiration they get from Ichigo, despite the fact that people think that Ichigo is based on Sam, actually comes from stories from Marx's dad, from his childhood in Japan.
So pointed out that like nowadays they couldn't have made that game because of like the cultural, you know, they're not Japanese, but the character was Japanese, and it just goes to, and they're like, but why not? Like, we're showing the beauty of the culture.
Right.
And
right.
I like how she threw that in there.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And there was a Japanese character in part of that sort of original team. But it was Sam in the interview when he's like, so if he was Korean, it wouldn't be a problem. Because he's Korean.
You're right.
But he's like, we were inspired by the art and the culture of Japan. That's why we chose it. A lot of racial and gender identity stuff. A lot of stuff about prejudice, even when it comes to like Sam's mom, when they're talking about her trying to get work in Hollywood and how she's only getting cast in these very specific roles for Korean women.
Well, yeah, and the prejudice. I mean, that's why Marx got shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of
issues. He got shot because they were upset that their company was promoting
right, it was just marriage
LGBTQ.
in general.
No,
it was marriage because his
gay marriage. They made gay marriage
his wife married a woman. Okay, yep. I was thinking she just had an affair, but it was with a woman.
Right.
Yep.
So the shooters were homophobic. They went to kill Mazer, or Sam. He wasn't there. Marx came to see them, and they shot him. The hate crimes, the sort of that idea of cultural appropriation, but beyond that, there's also this sort of like fetishization of other races. Final thoughts, and also the next book.
Final thoughts, I hope the movie doesn't ruin it. I don't know how they will do a single movie. I think they need to do like the series, you know, how they'll do like a limited series. I definitely loved it, would recommend it. And the next book is my pick, and it has a lot of the same themes.
Yeah.
It's Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, and it is I believe it's actually the fourth book in the series, but the way those are written, you can pick up any of them because it's about a different character each time within the same family. So you don't have to read them in order, but it will be what season 3 of Bridgerton is based on. And mostly I just wanted Noelle to have to read a mainstream historical romance. Well, I haven't started reading it yet because my mother-in-law had it. And so I had to have my kids go pick it up for me today so I could start it because she had borrowed it. So, yeah.
We keep making jokes about it being Lady Chatterley's Lover. Have you ever read that old, like, 1700s.
No, so that will be
Classic
the
literature.
second. That's 2 for this one that I haven't. I read the other 2 Bridgerton books.
Oh, nice. Well,
So, yeah.
in the next episode, you'll have to tell us where it falls or your favorite characters. And it reminds me a little bit of the Davenports. I'm getting a lot like vibes.
Shonda Rhimes produces the series for Netflix that are based on these books, and she switched up the cast so not everyone is white.
I've looked at pictures of the cast of Bridgerton. I don't know who's who, but I'll like pick who I'm pretending is which character in my mind.
Yeah. So right now on Netflix they have Queen Charlotte, and it's a spin-off of these books, but there isn't a book on this. But in the books, there is Queen Charlotte. Well, Queen Charlotte in real life was a real person. She was married to King George, the mad King George.
Yep.
And so they're characters in these books and in the show. So they did a spin-off of her, and it's like her story, but it's very fictionalized. But in the shows, she's black, and in history they do think that Queen Charlotte had black ancestry. And that was like a big deal because at that time none of the kings or queens in England did. And so they made it so that she does, but they made it like a bigger story that she is, like they started accepting, that is a good series. I haven't finished it yet, but if you do like the Bridgerton books, you're probably already aware of it.
Join us on that one. If you haven't read Tomorrow, read it. If you have read it, send us your favorite quotes and then recommend that book to other people because I've recommended it to a million people. It's so good.
And if you're listening right now, we're also now on YouTube if you want to watch instead.
I edit down the videos to be shorter because they say YouTube videos over 30 minutes don't get watched.
She just cuts out everything I say. And it's just
that
all
is
her.
not true. Thanks for watching and or listening, and we'll be back next time.
Bye.
Books and Brunch with Amber and Noelle.
Just kidding. Start over.